The room grew heavier as Tom, Ron, and Dave lingered around Maria's table. Other customers whispered quietly to each other, but no one dared to step in. The waiter set down his tray and slowly backed toward the counter, his eyes nervous as he watched the scene unfold. Every second stretched longer than it should, as if the whole place had fallen into a waiting silence. Maria sat upright, her back straight, her shoulders still, her gaze steady. She did not shift nervously nor lower her eyes. She did not show anger either. Only calm resolve. Her calmness itself felt like a quiet shield, something that confused the three men, though they did not admit it to themselves. Tom leaned in closer, trying to break her composure with his stare. He expected her to look away, to shrink back, but she did not move. Ron gave another laugh, the sound echoing through the restaurant like a heavy drum. Dave looked at his friends and grinned, following their lead like a shadow. But deep inside, he felt the smallest flicker of unease, though he quickly pushed it away. Maria spoke again, her voice as level as before. "You are standing too close. Step back now." Her words were not rushed. They were not loud yet. Every person in the room heard them clearly. Something about the tone carried weight far heavier than volume. It was the kind of tone that came only from someone who had given commands before someone used to being obeyed. Tom paused, his smile faltering just for a heartbeat. Ron elbowed him lightly, as if reminding him not to hesitate. Dave let out a quick laugh to cover the silence. They still believed they had control, but Maria's words had planted something in their minds that unsettled them. Maria let her eyes move across the three men slowly, one after another. She did not glare, yet each look carried firmness, as if she could see through them. Her calm breathing, steady posture, and unwavering gaze created a quiet strength that filled the corner of the restaurant more powerfully than their noise. The family near the window whispered to each other, their young daughter clutching her mother's sleeve. The two students sat frozen, their books forgotten, their eyes locked on Maria. The older men in the corner leaned forward quietly, their faces showing recognition of something they could not yet name. The waiter stood by the counter, unsure whether to call someone, but drawn by the strange calm in Maria's presence. Maria did not reach for anything, nor raise her hands. She simply let silence return after her words. It was a silence heavier than any shout, the kind of silence that makes people feel their own actions too loudly. Tom tried again, leaning his hand on the edge of her table. "So what if we stand here?" he said, his voice carrying a hint of challenge. Maria's eyes moved to his hand, resting too close to her plate. She tilted her head just slightly and spoke in the same even tone. "You have 5 seconds to move that hand." The air tightened. No one expected her to speak like that, even. The three men blinked in surprise. Ron chuckled quickly to cover the tension, but the sound felt weaker than before. Dave looked from Tom to Maria, waiting for what would happen next. When Maria's voice counted steady, not rushing, not rising to her gaze never wavered. 3. The family by the window held their breath. 4. The waiter stepped closer without realizing he had moved. 5. Tom pulled his hand back suddenly, as if it had touched fire. He forced a laugh, but his eyes betrayed the flash of uncertainty that had struck him. Ron and Dave looked at him with confusion, their plan to dominate the moment suddenly shaken. Maria did not smile. She did not gloat. She simply returned her eyes to her meal and lifted her fork slowly, as though nothing had happened. The quiet control she carried spread across the room, touching everyone watching. It was not about force. It was about disciplined presence, and the kind of strength that spoke without needing to move. Tom, Ron, and Dave stood frozen, for a moment not knowing what to do next. Their laughter returned, but it sounded forced, thinner than before. The people in the restaurant sensed the change. What had seemed like 3 strong men facing a lone woman now looked different. Now it looked like 3 restless voices struggling against a wall they could not push. Maria knew their pride would not let them stop so easily. She had dealt with such pride before during her service years, where arrogance could risk lives if not tempered by order. She understood the signs of stubbornness, and she understood how to wait. She did not rush to end it. She let them face their own choices. Ron tried to speak louder than before, filling the air with his voice to cover his friend's hesitation. Dave echoed him, but his laughter cracked midway, betraying his nerves. Tom rubbed his hands together, his eyes darting around as if searching for a way back to control. But control had already slipped from them the moment Maria began counting the ow. Older men in the corner exchanged looks, one of them whispering softly, "She carries herself like someone trained." He said, his voice low but full of certainty. The other nodded slowly, watching her with respect. The seconds ticked by. Maria continued, eating calmly, each bite slow and measured, her silence louder than their words. Every movement she made reminded the three men that she was not shaken. She was not pretending, she was not trying to act strong. She simply was strong. Tom finally leaned forward once more, his tone sharper. "Who do you think you are?" he asked. Maria lifted her eyes and answered with calm precision. "Someone you should not test." The words landed heavy in the air. They carried no anger, no threat, spoken only as truth, the kind of truth that cannot be argued against. Tom opened his mouth, but no sound came. Ron's laugh died before it reached his lips. Dave shifted his feet uneasily. The restaurant had fallen into complete silence now. Even the music from the speaker seemed distant against the weight of the moment. Every person waited to see what would happen next. Maria finished her last bite of food, placed her fork gently on the plate, and folded her hands. Her eyes moved across the room, then returned to the three men. "If you stay here any longer," she said, "you will regret it." Her voice was calm yet unshakable. Not a threat, but a promise born of certainty. The kind of certainty that only experience could give. Tom, Ron, and Dave exchanged glances. For the first time, doubt filled their faces. They had expected fear or anger. Instead, they met unbroken, calm, a calm too strong to ignore. Maria leaned back in her chair, still relaxed, but her eyes locked on theirs. The three men shifted uneasily, and for the first time they began to sense what everyone else in the room already knew. This was no ordinary woman. Maria pushed open the wooden door of the small restaurant and stepped inside. The warm air mixed with the smell of cooked food surrounded her as soon as she entered. The evening outside had been cool and quiet, but the inside of the place was alive, with voices, clinking dishes, and soft music that played from a speaker above the counter. She paused for a moment, letting her eyes move across the room before she chose a seat near the corner where she could see almost everyone without being in the center of attention. Maria was a tall woman with a calm expression and steady eyes. Her movements were smooth and confident, but not loud or boastful. She wore simple clothes and carried no sign that could tell strangers who she really was or what she had experienced in life. To most people, she looked like an ordinary woman who had come in for a meal after a long day. But hidden inside her was a spirit shaped by years of discipline, courage, and training that only a few could truly understand. The restaurant was half filled that evening. A family of four sat near the window, sharing laughter over a plate of food. A pair of older men were talking quietly at a corner booth. Two students with their bags on the floor leaned over their table, sharing stories between bites of their dinner. The waiter moved back and forth, carrying plates with practiced ease, his face tired but still polite with every smile he gave to the customers. Maria ordered a simple meal and sat with her hands resting lightly on the table. Her eyes moved once more around the place and then settled calmly on her plate when it arrived. She did not search for company, nor did she try to draw attention to herself. She was content in silence, enjoying the peace that came with moments when she could simply sit and breathe. At another table closer to the center sat three men. Their names were Tom, Ron, and Dave. They were not quiet like the others. Their voices carried across the restaurant, filling the air with loud laughter that sometimes made other customers turn their heads. They spoke quickly, interrupted each other often, and seemed more focused on being heard than on eating their food. Tom was the tallest, with a sharp face and restless eyes that moved around the room too often. Ron was broader, with a heavy laugh that came after almost every sentence he spoke. Dave was younger than the other two, and followed their lead, repeating their words and laughing when they did. Together, the three of them formed a group that felt louder than the rest of the restaurant combined. At first, Maria paid little attention to them. She was used to noise and could ignore it easily, but soon she noticed that their eyes had begun to settle on her each time she raised her head. She could see them glancing her way, speaking softly to each other, and then laughing again. She felt no fear, only awareness. Her mind noted their movements the way a trained eye always does. Tom leaned closer to his friends and whispered something. Ron gave a grin and Dave chuckled quickly. They stood together and began walking toward Maria's table. The chatter in the restaurant softened as if the air itself held its breath. Maria looked up slowly as they stopped beside her table. Ron leaned one hand on the chair across from her as if claiming it without asking. Dave stood close enough that his shadow touched the edge of her plate. Tom crossed his arms and let his eyes rest on her with a half smile that was meant to look confident but only carried arrogance. "You sitting alone?" asked Ron, his voice heavy and careless. He tilted his head, waiting for her response, but Maria stayed silent for a moment. Her gaze steadied her face, calm as stone. Dave chuckled softly, filling the pause with a sound that seemed meant to push her into speaking. She raised her eyes and said only one thing: "Step back." Her voice was not loud, but it was clear and strong. Every customer nearby heard it, and the waiter, who had been carrying a tray, froze in place for a moment. The silence that followed her words was heavy yet controlled, but Tom, Ron, and Dave only laughed louder, as if her calm warning was a game. They leaned closer, speaking carelessly without thought for how others looked at them. Maria listened without changing her expression. Inside, she measured the distance between herself and each man. She noted the weight of their stance, the angle of their arms, the tension in their shoulders. Her training made every detail fall into place like pieces of a map she had studied many times before. The family at the window tried not to look, but their eyes showed concern. The students whispered to each other nervously. The older men in the corner grew quiet and tense, as if remembering younger days when they too had seen trouble brewing. The waiter looked toward the counter, unsure if he should step forward or call for help. But Maria did not move in haste. She kept her calm because calm was her shield. She spoke once more, her voice even steadier than before. "I asked you to step back." Her words were not a plea. They were a command wrapped in quiet strength. For a moment Tom hesitated, his eyes narrowing as if he had heard something in her tone that unsettled him. But Ron laughed, again pushing aside the feeling, and Dave followed with another grin. The three men believed they had the power of numbers and loud voices. They believed the woman before them was only a quiet stranger who could be ignored. They did not know that. Every second passing brought them closer to a lesson they would never forget. Maria felt no fear, because fear was a thing she had learned to face long ago. She had spent years at sea where storms tested her resolve. She had stood on decks where silence could turn to chaos in a heartbeat. She had trained her body and mind until both were stronger than doubt or hesitation. She had worn the uniform of the Navy and carried its discipline into every step she took in life. Now she sat in the restaurant. As the three men leaned closer, her hand rested calmly on the table, but her mind was sharper than any blade. She knew that soon the moment would shift, and they would realize the truth that she was not alone, the truth that she carried the spirit of a soldier, the truth that respect was not something they could laugh away. And in 15 minutes the three men would come to learn exactly who Maria was. The restaurant was filled with heavy silence after Maria spoke of her Navy life. Every person inside carried the weight of her words in their hearts. The waiter stood near the counter, his eyes locked on her as if watching someone who carried more strength than he had ever seen before. The family at the window held one another quietly, the little girl whispering to her mother that the lady was like a hero. The students leaned close together, their notebooks forgotten as they whispered that this was the kind of strength no teacher could explain. The older men in the corner nodded slowly with deep respect, one of them saying softly that discipline never leaves a soldier even when the uniform is gone. Tom, Ron, and Dave stood frozen near Maria's table, their pride broken, their arrogance gone, replaced by uneasy silence. For the first time since they had walked into the restaurant, they were no longer the center of attention by choice, but by judgment. Every eye in the room looked at them not with admiration but with disappointment and quiet expectation that they must decide what to do next. Maria sat calm, her hands folded on the table, her eyes steady, but no longer on them. She had said enough, and she knew silence now was stronger than any further words. She let them stand in that silence because silence has the power to show truth more clearly than noise ever could. Tom shifted on his feet, his voice finally breaking through the quiet, though it trembled more than before. "So you were in the Navy," he said softly. As if trying to hold on to some form of confidence, Maria looked at him. Her eyes calm, her face steady. "Yes, I was," she answered, "and I carry that discipline with me, wherever I go." Her words were simple, yet they struck deep into the three men's pride. Ron rubbed the back of his neck, his earlier grin gone, replaced by hesitation. Dave lowered his eyes for the first time that evening, his chest rising with an unsteady breath. Maria leaned forward slightly, her voice steady and firm. "Strength is not shown by disturbing others. Strength is not shown by laughing at someone who asks for respect. Strength is proven in how you carry yourself and in how you treat people around you. You three wanted to test me, but you only revealed your own weakness." Her tone was not cruel. It was not mocking. It was a lesson, and everyone in the restaurant could hear it. The family nodded quietly. The students whispered to each other that they would remember her words forever. The older men in the corner exchanged a glance of pride, one whispering that she was not only strong, she was also wise. Tom lowered his head slightly, unable to meet her gaze. Ron's arms dropped to his sides, his shoulders heavy with regret. Dave finally spoke, his voice soft and almost uncertain. "We did not know who you were." Maria's eyes sharpened as she answered, "It should not matter who I am. Respect should be given, not because of rank or title, but because every person deserves it. If you cannot respect someone you do not know, then you have not learned the meaning of strength." Her words cut deeper than anything she had said before. The three men felt them not as anger but as truth. They realized how shallow their actions had been and how empty their confidence truly was. The room stayed silent, but it was no longer the silence of fear. It was the silence of learning, the silence of respect, the silence that comes when truth is spoken clearly. Tom finally took a step back, his voice lower than before. "We were wrong," he admitted. Ron looked at Maria, his face filled with shame. "Yes, we were wrong," he echoed. Dave nodded slowly, his voice trembling. "We are sorry." Their words were clumsy yet honest. They had not expected to reach this moment, but Maria's calm strength had led them here. Everyone in the restaurant heard their apology, and the air seemed to soften, though the weight of the lesson still hung heavy. Maria studied them for a long moment, her eyes steady, her face calm. Then she spoke with quiet firmness. "An apology means nothing without change. If you leave this place tonight and remain the same, then your words are empty. If you want your apology to matter, then learn respect not only here but everywhere you go." Her words were like a final command, a command not from anger but from wisdom. The three men nodded slowly, understanding that she spoke truth they could not deny. Tom bowed his head slightly. Ron rubbed his hands together nervously. Dave kept his eyes lowered. The family at the window looked relieved, the little girl whispering again that the lady was strong but also kind. The students leaned forward, writing her words down quickly on scraps of paper, as if wanting to keep them forever here. Older men in the corner smiled faintly, one of them whispering that she reminded him of officers he once served under. The waiter finally stepped closer, his voice soft. "Ma'am, would you like me to ask them to leave?" Maria turned to him and shook her head gently. "No," she said, "they will leave when they understand." Her answer surprised everyone, but it also inspired them. She was not interested in punishment. She was interested in teaching them a lesson that would stay longer than anger ever could. Finally took a deep breath and stepped back further. Ron and Dave followed his lead, moving away from her table, their shoulders heavy, their heads lowered. They walked slowly toward their own table and sat down without speaking. The restaurant stayed, silent, watching them not with fear now, but with expectation of what they would do next. Maria remained calm, her hands resting on the table, her eyes thoughtful. She knew the lesson was not complete yet. They had admitted their mistake. They had apologized, but now they had to decide what kind of men they would become after this night. Minutes passed quietly. The waiter moved gently from table to table. The music played softly in the background. The customers slowly returned to their meals, though their eyes still glanced toward Maria from time to time. The three men sat in silence at their table, their food untouched, their thoughts heavy with the weight of what they had just learned. Dave was the first to break the silence between them. His voice, soft, almost uncertain. "She is right," he said quietly. Tom nodded slowly, though he did not lift his eyes. Ron sighed heavily and whispered, "Yes, she is right." For the first time that evening, their voices carried honesty, not arrogance. They sat together, not as men full of pride, but as men who had just faced truth and could not escape it. Maria finished her drink and looked across the room at them once more. Her gaze was not harsh, but steady, as if reminding them silently of what she had said. They felt the weight of her eyes and knew she was not finished teaching them yet. The turning point had arrived. The three men had stepped into the restaurant loud and careless, believing strength was noise and numbers. Now they sat in silence, facing a woman whose quiet discipline had shown them what true strength really was. The lesson had begun to change them. But the question remained, would they walk away and forget? Or would they walk away and grow? Maria knew the answer would not come in words, alone, but in actions, and in the next minutes their choice would be revealed to everyone. The restaurant held its breath as Maria sat quietly at the corner table, her calm gaze fixed on the three men before her. Tom, Ron, and Dave no longer laughed the way they had at the beginning. Their voices had weakened, their movements less certain. Something about Maria's presence unsettled them in a way they could not explain. Maria did not rush her words nor raise her voice. Her silence itself carried weight stronger than sound. The family at the window sat frozen, the young daughter hiding, her face against her mother's arm. The students leaned forward, wide-eyed, their food untouched. The older men in the corner shared a knowing look, remembering moments of discipline and command they had once seen in their own years. Even the waiter stood still near the counter, his hands gripping a tray but his eyes locked on Maria. Tom finally broke the silence, his voice trying to sound steady. "You think you can tell us what to do?" Maria answered with a calm, steady tone. "I do not think I know. Step back now." Her words were not shouted, yet they struck harder than any loud voice. The three men shifted uneasily, their confidence slipping away like sand through fingers. Ron gave a nervous laugh, but it lacked the force it once carried. Dave looked between his friends, then at Maria, and felt something he had not felt all evening, a rising sense of respect mixed with fear. Maria leaned forward slightly, her eyes never leaving theirs. She spoke slowly, as if teaching them a lesson. Strength is not about loud voices or numbers. Strength is about discipline, control, and respect. Without those things, you have nothing. The room was silent, every person listening as if her words were meant for all of them, not just the three men. Her tone carried the weight of experience, the kind of weight that comes only from someone who had lived through storms and trials that tested the very core of who they were. Ron frowned and asked with forced boldness, "And what would you know about strength?" Maria's eyes softened, but her voice grew sharper. "More than you can imagine." Her words cut through the air like a blade of truth. They were not spoken to boast, but to remind them that there are lives lived beyond their small world, lives built on sacrifice. And courage lives where respect is not asked but earned. Tom crossed his arms and leaned back, trying to recover his pride. Yet inside he felt a rising unease. Something in her eyes told him she had seen things he could not dream of. He could not name it, but he could not deny it either. Maria slowly stood from her chair. She did not move quickly. She did not raise her hands. But when she rose, the room seemed to grow smaller around her. Her height, her posture, her presence all carried a silent authority. that demanded attention. She stepped around the table and stood face to face with the three men. Her voice was calm, but firm. You walked toward me thinking you could control the moment, but you do not understand what control truly means. Control is knowing when to act and when to stay still. It is knowing how to face fear and not let it rule you. It is knowing how to respect others before demanding anything for yourself. The words struck the three men harder than any shove. They stood silent, their laughter gone, their pride shaken. The family near the window whispered softly, their eyes wide with awe. The students nodded unconsciously, as if learning something important. The older men in the corner leaned forward, their respect growing, deeper. Maria took a slow step closer, her eyes fixed on Tom. You think strength is about standing over someone else, but true strength is standing firm without needing to push others down. I learned this not in comfort, but in places where storms raged, louder than thunder, where silence could mean danger, where every step demanded discipline or lives would be lost. Tom swallowed hard, his voice faltering. Who are you? Maria paused for a moment, then answered with a steady tone. I served in the Navy, lived years on the sea under the command of duty and honor. I trained, until every part of me learned to remain calm under pressure. I carried responsibility, not only for myself but for others whose lives depended on discipline and respect. That is who I am. Her words filled the restaurant with a new kind of silence. Not silence of fear, but silence of respect. The truth in her voice carried weight heavier than anything the three men had spoken all night. Dave's eyes widened, his posture shifting, as if he suddenly saw her in a new light. Ron's grin faded, completely replaced by uncertainty. Tom's shoulders sank slightly, the arrogance slipping from his face. Maria stepped back and spoke once more. I gave you chances to step away. I gave you the chance to respect me without forcing this lesson. But you chose not to listen. Now you know who you stand before. Her words were calm, not angry, but they carried a finality that left no room for argument. The three men exchanged uneasy glances. Their pride wounded, their confidence broken. The older men in the corner nodded to each other, one of them whispering quietly, "She carries herself with honor." The other answered softly, "Yes, she does." The family at the window looked relieved, though still tense. The young daughter whispered to her mother, asking if the lady was a soldier. The mother nodded gently and whispered back that the lady was more than that. She was someone strong and disciplined. The students leaned close to each other, whispering with admiration. They had never seen such calm strength in their lives, and it inspired them deeply. The waiter finally stepped forward. Slowly, his voice soft. "Ma'am, is everything all right?" Maria turned her head slightly and nodded, her calm smile returning. "Everything is fine now." Her answer was simple yet powerful. It carried assurance not only to the waiter but to everyone in the room. They believed her because they could feel the truth in her presence. Tom, Ron, and Dave stood awkwardly, their voices gone. Their earlier laughter seemed foolish now, their earlier confidence empty. They realized slowly, painfully, that in trying to test her, they had only tested themselves, and they had failed. Maria returned to her seat, her posture calm, her breathing steady. She sat once more at the corner table as if nothing had happened, but everyone in the restaurant knew that something important had taken place. A lesson in discipline, a reminder of respect, and a glimpse into the quiet strength of a woman who had once worn the Navy uniform with honor. The three men remained still, unsure whether to leave or stay. They knew now that every eye in the room was on them, not with admiration, but with quiet judgment. They had lost not to force, but to calmness, not to anger, but to discipline. And that loss was heavier than any they had faced before. Maria lifted her glass and took a slow drink. Her eyes no longer on them. She had no need to prove herself further. The truth had already been spoken. And the three men would carry that truth with them long after they left the restaurant. The clock ticked quietly on the wall, marking the passing minutes. Each second reminded Tom, Ron, and Dave of the weight of what they had just faced. They had entered the evening with pride and noise. They now stood in silence before a woman whose calmness had shown them the meaning of true strength. Maria's lesson was not finished yet. In the next moments, the three men would have to decide whether they would leave, with humility or stay and face a deeper truth, and whatever choice they made, the night would remain with them forever. The restaurant remained quiet long after Maria returned to her seat. The air carried a weight that could not be explained by words alone. Every customer in the room felt it in their hearts, the sense that they had just witnessed something that would stay with them for a long time. The family at the window leaned close to one another, the young daughter whispering again that the lady was like a hero from the stories she loved. The student sat with wide eyes, scribbling her words onto scraps of paper, determined not to forget. The older men in the corner nodded quietly, one of them whispering that she reminded him of leaders who had once guided him with the same calm power. The waiter moved carefully from table to table, yet his eyes kept drifting toward Maria as if drawn by the quiet strength she carried. At their own table, Tom, Ron, and Dave sat with heavy silence pressing on their shoulders. They had started the evening loud and careless, believing they could control any space. They entered simply by being louder than everyone else. But now they sat humbled, their laughter gone, replaced by reflection that none of them had expected. For the first time, they were forced to see themselves clearly, not as powerful, but as small. Maria sat still, her breathing calm, her hands folded on the table. She did not look at them constantly, but every time her eyes moved in their direction, they felt the weight of her silent reminder. She had said enough. Her words had already reached them, and now her silence finished the work. They understood now that silence from someone strong is not emptiness, it is discipline. Minutes passed. The sound of dishes clinking returned. The music from the speaker played softly again. People began to speak, quietly to one another. But the atmosphere never returned to what it had been before. It had changed deeply for everyone inside. The lesson of that night had already become part of them. Finally, Tom lifted his head, his voice low and honest. "We cannot stay here like this," he said to his friends. Ron nodded slowly, his earlier boldness gone. Dave agreed, his voice soft. "We must make it right somehow." The three men stood together, but not with arrogance this time. They walked slowly toward Maria's table, their shoulders lowered, their pride set aside. The restaurant grew silent again as everyone watched. Maria lifted her eyes as they stopped before her table. She did not speak. First, she waited. Her calm gaze rested on them, and in that gaze they felt both weight and mercy. Tom spoke quietly, his words careful. "We are sorry for what we did earlier. We should not have approached you the way we did. We should not have ignored your words. We were wrong." Ron added softly. "We thought strength was about noise and numbers, but you showed us that strength is about respect and discipline." Dave finished with a trembling voice. "We cannot take back what we did, but we want you to know we have learned from you." Maria studied them for a long moment, her face calm, her eyes thoughtful. She saw sincerity in their voices and in their posture. She nodded slowly, then spoke with steady clarity. "If you truly learned, then let your actions show it. Respect is not proven by words spoken. Once it is proven every day in how you treat others and how you carry yourself even when no one is watching." Her words filled the room once more, touching not only the three men but everyone listening. The family at the window smiled faintly, the mother whispering to her daughter that true strength is quiet and kind. The students scribbled faster on their papers, whispering that this was a lesson greater than anything they had heard before. The older men in the corner shared a look of deep pride, one of them whispering that she was the kind of leader the world needed more of. Tom, Ron, and Dave nodded, their voices soft with respect. "We will remember this night," they said together. "We will not forget." Maria leaned back in her chair, her voice calm, but final. "Then leave here carrying that lesson, and do not return to the men you were before. Grow into something better." The three men lowered their heads, then turned and walked slowly toward the door. The silence of the restaurant followed them, each step echoing like a reminder of the lesson they had been given. They opened the door, stepped into the night, and left behind not only the restaurant, but also a part of themselves that no longer held meaning. When the door closed, the restaurant exhaled as if releasing a long-held breath. The family at the window began speaking softly again, the little girl still watching Maria with wide eyes of admiration. The students clutched their notes, whispering to one another that they would never forget her words. The older men in the corner raised their glasses quietly as if in silent salute. The waiter approached Maria's table, his voice soft but filled with respect. "Ma'am, you changed this place tonight. Thank you." Maria gave a small, calm smile. "I did what needed to be done," she said. "Discipline is not something you use only in service, it is something you carry with you always. And sometimes you must share it with those who have forgotten respect." Her words reached not only the waiter, but everyone listening. The room carried a feeling of inspiration, not heavy now, but uplifting. People felt stronger simply by being present in the same space as her. Maria stood slowly gathering her things. She left her payment on the table and looked once more around the room. Her eyes moved across the family, the students, the older men, the waiter. Each of them felt her gaze like a quiet gift, a reminder that they too could carry discipline and respect in their own lives. She walked toward the door, her steps steady, her presence still commanding yet gentle. She opened the door and stepped into the cool night air. The restaurant watched her leave in silence, not because of fear, but because of admiration. Outside, Maria walked calmly down the quiet street. The stars above shone faintly, the city lights flickered in the distance. Her heart was calm, her mind clear. She did not think of herself as a hero. She did not think of herself as someone extraordinary. She thought only that she had carried her duty once more, as she always had, to live with discipline, to stand firm with respect, to share strength without anger. Inside the restaurant, the conversations slowly returned, but they were different now. The family spoke to their daughter about the meaning of respect and strength. The students promised each other they would live with discipline in their studies and in their lives. The older men whispered of their own memories of service and smiled with pride. The waiter carried food to tables with a new sense of calm, inspired by what he had seen. And Tom, Ron, and Dave walked together down the street in silence, their laughter gone, but their hearts full of thought. They did not speak for a long time because each of them carried Maria's words deep inside. They knew this night would follow them into the rest of their lives, guiding them, reminding them, correcting them whenever pride tried to rise again. Maria's lesson had not ended with the restaurant. It had only begun for everyone who had been there. That night would carry her strength forward in their own way, some in small choices, some in large, but all of them changed by the presence of one woman who showed them the true meaning of respect and discipline. And so the night ended, not with noise, not with anger, but with quiet strength, a strength that would echo in the hearts of those who had witnessed it for years to come.